You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. The law and the prophets. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Concerning anger, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you're angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you'll be liable to the council. And if you say, you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you're offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're on the way to court with them. Or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you'll be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Concerning adultery, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. Concerning divorce, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Concerning oaths, again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. Concerning retaliation, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. Love for enemies. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Amen.
Woo! I tell you, Jesus, that was rough. Could you imagine those folks hearing that the first time? You were squirming in the pew. I was squirming up here. They were really squirming on that mountainside. This Sermon on the Mount is, and has been called by some, if Jesus were to write a manifesto, if he were to sit down and say, this is sort of the summary of what I think on a lot of things, the Sermon on the Mount would be it. Last week we started with these Beatitudes, right? These attitudes that come as a result of following Jesus, these blessings. And this week we move into this idea of Christian influence, this flow as you live out the Sermon on the Mount. It sort of flows into this salt and light and these attitudes about anger and about lust and about enemies and all of these different things that get a little uncomfortable as Jesus says them, right? And so I want to just look at a few. We're not going to walk through that entire sermon, I promise you. If you were sitting there going, oh, Pastor Tom usually goes through it again. Oh, great. No, we're just going to hit some highlights because it's long. And there's a whole bunch in there that I won't cover today. And so if there's some questions you have, please talk to me. Because I don't want you to get confused or get too upset by anything Jesus said. There's a lot of interpretation with this. But I want to begin with salt and light, right? I want to begin with this idea of being salt and light. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You disciples, you followers of Jesus, you who claim to be Christians, you are salt and light. What does he mean by that? Well, let's talk about salt. Frank gave us a great introduction with the kids, right? What salt is good for. And salt, every single one of you, I imagine, has some form of salt in your home, right? And now we get fancy and we've got like Himalayan pink salt and this sort of salt and that, right? I think it all tastes similar. It tastes like salt, right? Why are we salt? Why does Jesus declare that we're salt? Well, we're salt because followers of Jesus, disciples, are salt because they're precious. That's the first point I want us to understand. In Jesus' day, salt was a valued commodity, right? You didn't just go in the store and pick up a whole box of it in various forms. It was a valued commodity. Roman soldiers were often compensated in salt. Hence the statement, what? You're worth your salt. You're worth your salt. And so you matter to God. You are precious to God. Christians, followers of Jesus, disciples are salt, not only because they're precious, but because they have a preserving influence in this world. Right? What did salt... Well, they should. They should have a preserving influence in this world. Salt was used to do what? Preserve meats, right? We have refrigerators, so you don't have a lot of salted and cured meats stuck in some basement in your house, but you have refrigerators. Back then, they would, if they killed an animal or whatnot, they would have to preserve it. Especially in the Mediterranean, a lot of the fish was salt cured, so it could be sent off to the Roman Empire in different places. So we have a preserving influence. Christians, followers of Jesus, should have a preserving influence in the world. We should bring a sense of preservation. We should push against the slow decay of this world. I say should because we don't always, right? We don't always. What we see at the personal care pantry and Joe's dinner and the constant ministries that you're all involved in. And every time I turn around, I hear more about what church members are doing in this community and in this world. Things that aren't even necessarily quote-unquote ministries of this church. They're just things you're doing to be light and to be salt, to be a preserving influence in this world. We are salt because we add flavor, or at least we should add flavor, right? Christians should be flavorful people. We should be flavorful. More than adding flavor to things, what does salt do? I think Frank said it earlier, but what does it do? It enhances the flavor, right? It makes things taste like they really should. It brings alive things. Popcorn with no salt is just foam, basically, right? It's corn foam. You gotta have butter too. I'm like, yeah, when I do popcorn, I'm just gonna go for it. right? You can have salt and butter. And even if there's butter flavoring, let's be real. What do you really need on there? More butter. And every time I regret it, it's all stuck in your teeth and you feel ill. But if you're going to go for it, you look through, you cross the thing, you might as well keep going. Salt enhances flavor. In many ways, it enhances the original good that God intended on this world, right? That original good when God created and said, it is good. Salt points people back to that. Christians bring people back to that. People living out the call of Christ point people back to Creator and creation. We enhance the good. Disciples are like salt because we make a way. We make a way. What is salt used for? Not so much in California in the mountains, but if you live back east and it was snowing, what do they put on the roads? Salt. That's why you don't buy an old pickup truck from Detroit, right? Because it's probably going to have a little bit of what underneath? Rust, yeah. Salt makes a way. They put it on the roads to melt the ice, to make a way, to make it passable for people. Christians in this world should make a way for people to come to Christ. We should remove the barriers, those things that make it difficult to find God. Oftentimes we find churches tend to make more barriers, right? We have all these different, we have our own language, we have our own way of doing things, and somebody comes in that's never been in the church before, walks in and goes, this is weird. Because they don't understand, and so we should work to make a way. I told you the story maybe before. One thing, if I tell you a story multiple times, just act surprised. I do that when you tell me stories multiple times. So it's just fair, right? Men's coffee, we do that to each other. We're like, oh, that's great. I've never heard that. We have. So when I was running an after-school program in Ione, I remember telling the kids, I said, go upstairs and sit down in the pews. And because they're 5th and 6th graders, they all ran like crazy. And they all ran up to the sanctuary, which was above the social hall. And then they came back down and they said, what are the pews? And I went, oh, the benchy things. The bench, and they go, oh, okay. I had no idea, pew. They don't know what pews are. So see, sometimes even our language is a barrier to people finding Christ. And so we should be making a way. We should be way makers, not barrier creators. One theologian, Reverend France, said, disciples, if they are true to their calling, make the earth a purer and more palatable place. We bring a purity and a joy and a life to things. And yet Jesus says if salt loses its flavor, it is then good for nothing. Salt must keep being salty, right? If it's to be of any value. What good is salt if it has no flavor? If you bought a box of salt, sprinkled it on your food, and it had no saltiness, you would do what with it? You'd probably return it, right? Bring a receipt back and say, hey, Rayleigh's, this is saltless salt. And what's interesting is salt, technically, can't really lose its saltiness. So I'm thinking, Jesus, your science is a bit off. Salt can't, just bear with him. But it can be diluted by impurities. So as I did a little research on the salt that Jesus was referring to, not like the salt we refer to, salt mostly came from the Dead Sea, right? Of course, makes sense. It's a big salty body of water. And it was not the purest salt. The Dead Sea salt has all sorts of other minerals in it, right? It's got all kinds of things in it. And in the first century, they didn't have necessarily the ways to refine that so that all you had was salt. So the salt you put on your food probably had all sorts of other goodies in it from the Dead Sea. Sodium chloride, the salt part of the Dead Sea salt, was the most easily soluble and could wash out very easily. So you get some salt from wherever they bought salt, I guess, back in Jesus' day, the salt guy. I don't know if there was a salt guy, a salt store, but you would get the salt, and if it got washed out, what you'd be left with was a white powder that looked like salt, but didn't taste like salt. And so Jesus, when he says if salt loses its saltiness, he was referring to salt that it had the sodium chloride washed away. And it was not effective for preserving. It was not effective for melting things. It was not effective for adding flavor. It was not effective for anything. It essentially was like road dust and would just be thrown out. Too many in the church look the part, but they neither taste or act like salt. This is why Jesus walked around a lot calling people hypocrites, right? The word hypocrite really means actor, somebody that plays a part. We play the part sometimes, but we don't preserve, we don't influence, we don't enhance. We've lost our saltiness. And then he goes on, he says, you are not only salt, but you're the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Light, of course, is this powerful metaphor for Christians and for the church. Light is hope. Light is a guide. Light keeps us safe. Light reveals what is hidden. The command is that we are the light of the world, a beacon in a dark place, pointing people to Jesus. And if you remember the song as a kid, This Little Light of Mine, are we singing that today? I think we are. Are we going to shout that part? When I was a kid, we'd say, hide it under a bushel, and all the kids would say, no. No! Right? No. We could also say, keep it in the church. No. What good is 110 lights in a dark world if we're all in the same spot? We're really great for us, not so great for the people in darkness, right? What good is it when the power goes out if all of your flashlights are in one drawer in the basement? Right? Not a good spot for them. The best is if you have a light in your bedroom by the nightstand, maybe one in the kitchen, right? Maybe one in the front room. And if you live somewhere where the power goes out a lot, you know that and you're prepared. If your power never goes out, and when it does, you're going, oh, great. Where's the flashlights? Or just as bad, the flashlight that's never been used, and then when you need it, right? And then you go, well, I'll just change the batteries. And what happened to those old D batteries in there? They're all corroded, right? You see the metaphor and how it's working with Christians? When we don't use our light, it's more difficult to use it when we need to. When we cease being light, we struggle to even be it when we need to be light. The more times you are light for people in this world, the easier it is to be light for people in this world. And the great thing about this light that Jesus is talking about is it's not your light to begin with. It's light that's reflected from that relationship. Because you might be sitting here going, you know, Pastor, I don't have light some days. Some days I don't have any salt. I'm struggling. I need light. You're telling me to go be light. The nice thing is that the light that we provide comes from Jesus. We reflect it. Christ is our light. Pope Benedict said this. He said, Jesus is inviting us to come out of ourselves, to forsake our human certainties, and to make ourselves a gift of unbounded love for this world. To reflect that to this world. Reverend Rob McCoy says this. He says, so let your light so shine. There is a light that is within you that is good. There is a light that is within you that is of God. There is a light within you that needs to be seen. I think for a moment of the children in this world that have never been told that they are the light of anyone's world. And it breaks my heart. I think for a moment of the people stuck in abusive relationships, allowing their light to be crushed, and I want to scream. I think for a moment of youth that only want to hide and be as invisible as possible so as not to draw anyone's attention. And it kills me to know that they have never been told, you were created in the very image of God. The light that God created at the very moment of creation, that is in you. Hear Jesus crying to you today, you are the light of the world. Sometimes we need to hear that, don't we? You are the light of the world. I love that. Light of the world means that we are not only light receivers, but light givers. To be salt and to be light. And I love that Jesus doesn't just say, hey, you should be salt. Or, hey, you should be light. Or try to be salt. Or it'd be really neat if you were salt. He just declares you are salt. He just says it, right? As a matter of fact. I love that. You are salt. As we become new creations in Christ, we become saltier. And that sounds bad. Sounds like we become crankier. We become more flavorful, and we become more light. Preacher Charles Spurgeon said, poor world, it is dark and gropes in midnight, and it cannot get light except as it receives it through us. To be the light of the world surrounds life with the most stupendous responsibilities, and so invests it with the solemn dignity. Hear this, ye humble men and women, ye who have made no figure in society, ye are the light of the world. If you burn dimly, dim is the world's light, and dense its darkness. Call to be salt and light. And then Jesus, and I won't go through all this, Jesus then dives into this next whole section, right? He says, you've heard it said, right? You've heard it said that if you are angry at somebody, you've already murdered them. And we're like, oh, great. Because how many of you have been angry at somebody? Just yesterday maybe, right? Or maybe this morning. You went on Facebook, and there you go. He says if you looked at somebody of the opposite sex inappropriately and thought those thoughts, you've already committed adultery. He says you should love your enemies. Love my enemies? It's difficult, Lord. You should pray for them. He talks about divorce, and I won't go deep into this, but he talks about divorce because during that time, men could just give their wives a certificate of divorce for no reason. Like, she's not looking as good as she was when we got married. Literally, this is how it went. And so Jesus is elevating the rights of women when he talks about divorce. And he goes on and on with all of these you've heard it said, enough that we were exhausted when we got done with that, right? So Beatitudes, salt and light, love your enemies, don't murder people, adultery, on and on. And then the last verse of Matthew 5. Let me read it. It's really short. Be perfect. Therefore, as God is perfect. So I get done with that and I go, oh, okay. This must just be a metaphor. All right, this just must be an ideal. And I think this is impossible. How many of you have been perfect yet in this life? No, that's why as Methodists we say we're going on to perfection. I have not gotten there yet. I'm going there. Maybe even in heaven we'll continue that journey on to perfection, right? That's my own theology. Somebody's going to watch this on Facebook and go, that's not in the Bible. But maybe we continue to grow in Christ forever. Kind of like that. And so we get to this point. Jesus has built this really amazing sermon, this very difficult sermon. And then he says, be perfect. And we go, I can't. That's impossible. And he goes, you're right. You're right. I've gotten you just to where you need to be so that you might fall upon your knees and say, God, I cannot. I need you to be light. I need you to be salt. I need you to not make me want to hate people some days. I need you to make me want to love my enemies and not throw rocks at them and hit them and hurt them, whether it's with words or with weapons. God, I need you so I can love people I don't understand and I don't agree with. God, I need you so that I can be salt and light to people that I don't even like. And yet you call me to be salt and light to them. And so we come and we fall upon our knees before Jesus and we say, Jesus, take me, take all that I am, fill me up so that I could overflow, not with my salt and my light, but with the salt and the light that you give me. Because let's be honest, Tom is just Tom. It's really difficult. But when I get out of the way and let Jesus do the work through me that Jesus wants to do, some days it's pretty cool. And so that's the call today. And so let's bow. And let's ask God to fill us. I just encourage you maybe in the quietness of your heart to just say, God, I want to be salt and I want to be light. Confess, Jesus, it's difficult. Lord, would you empty us out of all the things that are contrary to you And God, would you fill us with that light that you instilled in us at creation. When you said, let there be light, God, you put that in each of us, and it's still there. Would you draw that out? Would you fill it up? Would you make it bright? God, forgive us when we let our salt be diluted. Forgive us when we hold all the lights inside the church building. God, help us to get out and to be light and to be salt, to love our enemies, to care for those who we don't love and we don't like, but to do the work that you've called us to do. God, I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.